Every year, I present a list of our digital disruptions to watch out for. That presentation is done quite frequently as there's a lot of interest in it. And one question keeps coming up over and over again, which is, do you ever look back at these things and see how they panned out? So we're going to do something a little different here today. And we're going to go and look back at a few of the disruptions that we talked about in the past and see where they are now. Did they pan out? Or are they still something we expect to happen? So when I look back at these, I'll start with these disruptions and give you an idea of what we mean by the disruption. Keep in mind that a disruption represents a fundamental shift in some system of technology, behavior, economics, or anything that you actually care about. Some fundamental shift that doesn't just change for a moment and then change back. That would be a fad. Our disruptions really about things that are going to shift the entire world, that are going to change markets, that are going to revolutionize them ultimately, but we'll do it over time. So when we talk about these disruptions, I'll try to give you some context as to where they might be. So let's jump right in. First, we had a disruption in 2019 that we listed. Sometimes we repeat these from year to year, but this one was first introduced in 2019, and it was called AI, Decency, Trust, and Ethics. The idea behind this was that we needed to pay much more attention to the ethics behind using generative AI solutions. Now, if you don't know what that term means, then I can say another word that'll probably give you an idea: Chat GPT. Chat GPT is all the rage now. Everybody's talking about it. And it is a generative AI solution, a large language model that allows you to ask it all sorts of questions, and it'll give you, answers to it. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong, but increasingly it generates things that are of value to the user. So when we talk about that, what happens when an AI solution that you can talk to, for instance, begins to spout things that are not ethical, disclosing information it shouldn't disclose, perhaps using insults, or perhaps even having a bias to it that tends to lead people down the wrong path? What we had suggested in this disruption was that there would come a time when technology providers would build in AI mechanisms to detect when AI was going wrong, when it was doing something unethical, when it was being indecent. And that notion is still ongoing as we see it today. Now, we had a prediction associated with this. We predict certain things are going to happen by a certain time frame. And we predicted quite boldly that by 2023, a self-regulating association of oversight for AI and machine learning would be established in at least 4 of the G7 countries. Well, that hasn't happened. However, what we do see is we do see more and more interest by people, governments, and businesses in the idea of making sure that AI is an ethical delivery. And increasingly, what we're finding out is that the only way we're going to be able to do this is to actually use AI to track AI, have AI check on itself. If we go back to ChatGPT for a moment, you've got something that was created called ChatGPT 0. GPT-0 was a tool that was designed to actually help to tell whether or not an essay or some deliverable was written by ChatGPT. The idea, again, is to say, all right, if students are being unethical and having GPT written essays, can we find out whether that happened and what should we do about it? So we're on that path right now, but has it revolutionized anything at this point? It has not just yet. It is enhancing markets. We're adding more capabilities to markets. You'll see hundreds of advertisements for using generative AI in different markets that have arisen to date. Everybody is now thinking about, what can I ask of the machine and what can I rely on in what it returns to me? So we're clearly on a path toward transforming markets that are going to be able to be very different from what they were before. I always say, if you're a spreadsheet jockey and you like doing analysis of numbers in spreadsheets, these generative AI solutions like ChatGPT are stalking you and stalking your job, because they can do that. If you're a coder, a programmer, and you're out there trying to write code, these tools are already able to give you a faster setup of code than you've ever been able to do in the past. But the question then becomes, when do they cross that ethical line, and when does it matter to you? We're still a few years out from that becoming a generic thing that is built in, but there are many that are working on the problem today. So that's how we look at these things. From AI, decency, trust, and ethics, we move to another idea related to AI, and that was the idea of synthetic data. In 2021, we introduced the notion of synthetic data in our research to talk about the fact that there is a lot of real data generated and there's a lot of synthetic data generated in the world. Now, you might ask, what is synthetic data? Well, synthetic data is artificial data generated by artificial intelligence. That might not help very much, but reality is that in the generation of an answer or a solution, one of the things that happens is a lot of data is ingested into a machine through a machine learning model. A lot of network layers are trained to build relationships in that data and then to provide insights through looking at through those relationships. And this notion is that once we can do that, we can start creating models to evaluate how things are going to happen, right? Models give us a way of looking, think of them as simulations, give us a way of looking at a situation that hasn't happened before, and then determining from what the interactions of the data are that one thing might occur or another might occur. And in this case, synthetic data is an output. It is something that's created to facilitate the models. So if you think about this, a self-driving car going down the highway has to have information about what other cars are on the road next to it, how fast are they going, how far away they are. It even has to have information about trees that are lined along the road. What if a tree were to fall over? How do trees tend to behave in certain types of weather conditions or on certain roads? All of these things allow an AI solution to create information about those trees that doesn't require it to know where every leaf on the tree is. That doesn't require it to know exactly what a given tree is or is doing, but to model what trees are likely to do. And that's a generation of synthetic data. And because of that, we can use it to be able to create models of things that we would never model as human beings. Now, one of my undergraduate degrees is in architectural engineering technology. And the idea of this was to say that we look at how technologies are used to build buildings and to support different architectures. But we would look at different models. We would think, okay, how do we model whether a skyscraper is going to fare well in high winds or in an earthquake condition? We would model those things. But we would never think to model how it would fare in high winds during an earthquake and at the same time as everyone in the building tries to flush the toilet. That's an absurd scenario that we would tend not to model. But AI can model such scenarios as a matter of course, as a routine thing, because it does it so fast and with such frequency that it can go through options we would not even consider. Now, that might seem efficient until you look at the scale of it, the speed of it, and how many of those models it can dismiss to get to a more refined set. And thus, synthetic data can be more accurate than real data. Now, real data is data that's obtained through direct observation or use, and you can't get away from it. The synthetic data has to check in with real data to see how far it's drifting away from it periodically. So the disruption was that we believed that synthetic data would overshadow real data in AI models, and that's happening now. So this is a disruption that is already underway. It is one that's fully transforming markets because it's starting to allow us to rely on AI to do things that we wouldn't have done before. We already have AI that's relied on in a surgical suite. We have AI for doing diagnosis of illness. These are life critical things, and AI is relied on all the time to do them. We have AI that is being increasingly relied on to fly planes or flying cars that are rising, right now. We have AIs driving cars on you that are next to you on the street. And we have these things building more and more, and they're all using synthetic data in that process. So this is a disruption that has certainly begun to pan out. And I believe that 2023 is the year of generative AI. It is the year everything changes. When the masses of people around the world begin to involve their thinking around generative AI solutions, and they realize that they can do it themselves. They can touch it. It's easy access. So disruptions are interesting. Sometimes they go well as we expected. Sometimes they play out differently than we actually expected. And sometimes they don't really get to where we thought they'd get at all. Now, the third one that I look at, there are two disruptions that were introduced in 2018. One of them was nanotechnology, and the second was swarm intelligence. Nanotechnology using the nanometer scale to build machinery that could actually do things. We actually have little nanobots that can perform the jobs of bumblebees, that can actually pick up pollen from a plant and fly it and pollinate other plants. We have these tiny little drones that can do that, and we're worried about the bees being disappearing from the world. So it's a good thing to do this. But do we see nanobots disrupting the world every day? Do we see them as a part of what we do every day? Can you even point to an example of a nanobot being used in the context of your life or your work? Most of us can't. This is a disruption that has yet to transform markets on a scale enough to say it is a played out disruption. It hasn't played out the way that we thought it would happen more frequently, and certainly more quickly. Same thing is true with swarm intelligence. We went through a time when drone fleets were a big deal, where we had drones that could perform dances in the air. I saw a drone night show where they had drones in the air that shone lights, and they built a model of the Starship Enterprise floating above people's homes, and it could change course and go to warp drive and do all these cool things. These kinds of swarms of drones are very powerful in entertainment, and they can be used even in agricultural settings where you have a swarms of drones that fly across an agricultural field and examine all of the different aspects of the field: temperature, plant condition, pesticide use, and even the migration of pests across the plants in one motion. But again, we don't see that happening in swarms, where the intelligence of the swarm, which is driven by the number of units, each one having processing power that's added to the power of the units around it, to be able to create a set of intelligent decisions from it. Most of that information is piped back to an analytical base, and some human being or a group of human beings will analyze it. So this one hasn't panned out as we had thought it would to this date. But remember something about disruptions. It's not so much about being right on the timing. It's about, will these things make a difference? Should you be thinking about them now? And should you consider whether they're ones that you should act on today, or maybe you can avoid or ignore until the future? So even the ones that don't pan out can be very useful. Another thing about disruptions is we focus on the secondary impacts, the secondary effects. Quite often, the primary effect of the disruption isn't the most important thing. I call it, it's kind of like in predictions, I call this the Bart syndrome rule, or the Bart Simpson rule. He's always saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And you have to look to this and say, okay, so if we get a disruption catalyst like swarm intelligence, people start thinking that swarms are going to take over the world. And maybe they don't as fast as we think. But the secondary effect is that drone technology has become widely distributed and used. And we now use drones to replace cameras in movie filming. We use them in our entertainment. We use them as hobbies. We have them, for insurance inspection of roofs of homes. So and agents don't have to go out and do that work. So a secondary aspect of swarm intelligence is that we recognize that drones can be very powerful, and they are very powerful across many different industries today. Whether they're working as a collective intelligence, different story. But the secondary, the tertiary, the quaternary effects of these kinds of disruptions, you should never ignore. And then we have one more. Real-time language translation, one of my favorites, because it's one of those sneaky ones. It's one of those ones that kind of sneaks up on you, and you don't realize how much is actually happening there. But it's actually changing our world quite a bit. When I was a kid, we used to have fun going on a road trip. If we would go somewhere in the car, first thing we did is we went to 7-Eleven and we'd buy a paper map. We'd pick up a map, maybe go to the train station or bus station, they have them, and pick up a map, and you'd open the map out, you plot your course before you get in the car, and then somebody's got the map in their hands and say, "Hey, there's a road coming up, you got to turn here." Now, if you're younger, you may not have experienced this, and you're probably lucky for it. But if you have experienced it, one of the things you might notice is that we don't do that anymore. These days, we have GPS, we have satellites that help us track where we are, and we have mapping systems that help us know where we're going or where anything is. We even have Google Earth. The Google Earth engine has mapped the entire planets for the last 40 years of time series data that we can look at on how the planet has been evolving. But personally, these systems allow us to avoid the idea of using maps. Now, turn that idea of the sneaky little dissolution of maps into the idea of the dissolution of those little booklets you used to take when you went to visit a foreign country. You went to visit another country, you didn't speak the language, so you took a little language book and you get a phrase book. You could ask, where is the restaurant? How do I get to the train station? How do I convert money from US dollars to British pounds at the time? So we don't need those anymore now, because we can actually do real-time language translation. We can pick up a Google Pixel phone. A Pixel 7 is one that does it quite well. Speak into it in one language and then repeat it in another. There's a limited number of languages that it can use, but it is such a easy thing to do that we don't even think of it as a special thing at this point. It's transformed the way we think about translating. If you don't use Google Translate, or you don't have a Pixel phone or something like it, you go on the web, you go up to Google Translate, you type it in, it gives you the answer. The idea of real-time language translation has been going on for a while, and it's really progressed quite nicely. I have right here in my possession something that I thought was very fun when I got it. This is a Waverly Labs earbud set. This is a real-time language translation tool. You put it in your ear. When someone speaks a language to you, it translates that language into your ear. So now this is fairly commonplace. You can get an app to use almost any earbuds to be able to do this kind of translation if they're Bluetooth enabled. And the idea of being able to go somewhere where you don't understand the language can transform many things. Language translation services, the ability to conduct meetings in different business environments, the ability to actually begin to understand negotiation points and even supplement those negotiation points with other data that's injected into the conversation. Add to that generative AI, and all of a sudden you can begin to get a very nice picture of what's going on, even if it's coming at you in a different language. Now, I do some inquiries with clients quite frequently. Doing inquiries is easy. I find doing them in Japanese very difficult. But if I have language translation from a human being or from a set of earbuds, it helps me immeasurably. So this is a disruption that really is changing the barriers of intercultural language, that we ran into. It also changes this role of translation. It's still needed. Don't get me wrong. It's not gone. But the notion of a disruption is that it's either been supplemented, it's been transformed, or it's been revolutionized, which would mean it may be gone. Right now, we're transforming markets, and that's where we thought this would be at this point in time. So there you have 4 areas, actually 5, that 2 were embedded together, where we talked about disruptions in the past and how they panned out. Again, the idea is not to be right about exactly when they will do something. It is to say these are important things that you should be thinking about now and deciding on whether you should do something now or maybe wait till later. And if they don't pan out the way they should today, maybe they will tomorrow. So we'll revisit them and see how they work out. So I think that's about all we have time for going through here today. And I'm hoping it gives you a little insight in how we think about these things. Come back to us with a little more requests. We look at our predictions and say what's right and wrong. We have a 75 to 80% accuracy rate on predictions. With disruptions, we're probably in that same range at this point on the timings that we have. But as you do this, always remember you must be seeking to recognize, prioritize, and respond to digital disruption. Recognize it before it happens, prioritize what you want to do about it, and then plot your path to a good response. That will keep you safe in an age of uncertainty. Thank you very much for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.